By the way, we're talking in generalities, so if any of you get offended, first of all, toughen up.
Exactly.
The reason you're probably offended is because this directly applies to you. So I'm saying that jokingly. I know you're trying. You're doing great. You're amazing. Oh my gosh, you're such a brilliant star in a sky full
Eric,
of
are you
brilliant
making
stars.
the Ink Pulp podcast a safe space now?
Well, I'm not. You know.
This is the Ink Pulp podcast.
Say the thing. I said I'm eating a breakfast bar, and what'd you say?
I said, are you eating a carnation breakfast bar?
Jesus Christ, man, you're ancient. Okay, so here's the thing. When you mention it, it brings up a memory. Yeah, I remember that from back in the day.
Yeah.
But by no means is that front of mind for me. You know what I mean? The fact that that's the thing that you had to refer to, it wasn't like all of these other, brands that are existing in this decade.
Yeah, but
you
what
had
other
to go
breakfast
back.
bars are there? It's not like people like that. Now they're
There's
protein bars.
There's plenty.
They're not
Oh,
called
I'm
breakfast
sorry.
bars.
I'm sorry. I describe it as a fucking breakfast bar. And you
Yeah,
describe
you
it as
used an old term, so I just went with you. So it's really your fault.
No. All right. The thing is, I enjoyed our conversation with, and to give the audience context as far as like the timeline is concerned, because I don't know if these are going to be released sequentially.
Yeah, they should be.
That's such a great conversation with Jason and Sean Alexander that we did. What was that just yesterday?
2
It was
days
so
ago.
much fun.
No,
2 days
you're
ago?
right. It was
Okay.
yesterday. You're right.
Okay, listen, Mr. Breakfast Bars.
Obviously, I need a carnation breakfast bar because my mind's not working.
Your brain needs some nutrition. Point is, I really appreciated that conversation so much. I was like, oh man, it's so much fun. Let's do this back to back. And how did I refer to it? Like I referred to it as a filler episode, even though it's not, right? So I said, Sean, let's jump on the stream again, and let's jump on the recording again, do another one. And I really think that conversation with JSA biased me, and as far as my overall enjoyment. And in the first 30 seconds that you jump on with frickin' Carnation Breakfast Bar, I was like,
back to the shit show, huh?
that was definitely JSA. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Ink Pulp podcast. This is episode 142.
This is episode 146.
Oh, there you go.
You're close.
I wish we've done too many, and I wish it was 4 less. Okay, so it's just Sean and me again. By the way, this is
Mateo
your
didn't even
amazing.
respond, did he?
No, he didn't. He just said, "Screw you guys. We're not. He's not coming."
He just
You
comes
only
in when
get
he
me
feels
once.
like it.
You get me once a week, and that's all you get. I don't think you can handle two shows worth of Cirque du Soleil Italian style. But anyway, we're here with our amazing host, Mr. Sean Crystal. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you guys enjoyed that Jason Sean Alexander show. That was great. There was I don't know if our editor Jamie is gonna fix not just the audio, but hopefully the composition works okay, because he was doing things in portrait. We're currently using an app that records all of our feeds independently. Which, by the way, can I double down on the idea that even though Jason was on his Wi-Fi, his files uploaded so much faster than ours.
Very fast.
And you're what do you call it, right? You have an actual, you're hardwired into your internet.
In. Yeah.
So am I, but it didn't upload that much faster, but it was significantly faster. And yet, Mateo, who is also under similar sort of circumstances, minus the what do you call it? The Atlantic Ocean between he and I. Boy, that Wi-Fi is crap. I genuinely believe instead of an actual cable, it's just lines of spaghetti and pasta that's connecting.
I was gonna say it's like the Flintstone. There's a monkey under his house.
Yeah, there's just like substantiating
sending
his,
telegraphs. Everything's a binary code.
Yeah, I swear to God, everything is being sent through. Yeah, like I said, like some weird hollowed out piece of pasta. Anyway, thank you for joining us. We don't necessarily have a topic today, but we talk about something.
I do have something I want to.
Oh, you do?
I want to. I mean, it's a short conversation, but I'm a little nervous, Eric.
What's going on?
We are on this Just Us 2, and I've been nervous for the past 3 to 4 weeks of these podcasts that my computer will just crash in the middle of it.
All right.
But I always was like, but we'll be okay because the conversation will go on and it'll take me 20 minutes to get back, but it'll be okay. But if I crash, this dies. So
You're not giving me enough fucking credit, friend.
Oh, you want to do a solo show?
Listen, I would prefer to do it as a solo show. I'm doing it clearly as it's not the Eric and Eddie show, it's the Ink Pulp podcast show. So you leaving would probably, I would guess, I would try to understand what our SEOs look like thereafter. I would try to understand our numbers, because if it shoots up, I'm going to take full credit for it. And if it shoots down, it's because you fucking left. You know what I mean?
As you should.
Anyway. No, it's very little of it is on me, but you were talking about having a computer that's unreliable on your end, but you're upgraded. You have upgraded. You've got your brand new.
It's right here. I'll show you.
Let's take a look at this computer. Oh, there it is. That looks as sexy as you can possibly get. That was a wise choice on your end. But it's not going to take you that long to hook it all up and have it all up and running.
My monitor arrived this morning at home, so I can hook it all up when I get back from my weekend trip.
Good. Well, like you said, that was a short conversation. Thank you very much for showing up, everybody. We'll see you guys next week.
But you know what I've been thinking since our interview with Jason yesterday?
Tell me.
So I'm ordering all my new equipment, new computer. Yeah. I'm going to finally get like an iPad Pro. I haven't had any iPad. Yep. And I'm thinking about doing my comics work on it.
What a
At
silly
least that
goose.
short I'm doing first. I'm going to try on there.
Right. Wait a second. I think I might have an iPad here that I can have you play around with.
Are you serious?
Yeah. I think so. It's the one. Yeah. I can see it from here.
You don't want it? You have another one?
Yeah, I have one that I'm currently working on. The other one that I previously worked on. The only difference is the what do you call it? It's running perfectly well. So before you invest any sort of money into it, play around with that one. And if it's something that you really super want, you need a brand new unit, which you know me about computers, right? Like we talked about this offline.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of buying things like, especially at the you're already paying a premium for being a Mac user, right?
For sure.
If you can get away with paying just a little bit less or significantly less, knowing full well that unit is still pretty dang operable, I'm a huge proponent of that, and spend your money elsewhere, right? Because
dude, I love it because I mean, what I was looking at, they're not cheap at all.
No, they're not cheap. No, they are the furthest thing from cheap, but. I look at things as I look at things in a cost benefit analysis, right? If I'm doing the majority of my work on this iPad, I want to pay a premium for it because I don't want it to fail on me. Hobbyists, which I still, it's not a slight on you by any means, right? But you're trying to see what your options are. You're trying to see if it's good for you, So
exactly.
I put you in that category to be like, Sean is just trying to figure out if it's a good fit for him. No sense in spending that kind of money, especially because worst case scenario, you go, this ain't for me. This is going to sit in the closet. Jason talked about it yesterday. He's like, I bought a Cintiq and it sat on the desk collecting dust. And you're like, whoa, that's a huge expense to use it for a few months, but still you're not getting your money out of that.
All right. Well, that's great. Cause then that would be great. If you don't mind, I would love to give it a spin. Cause I do have to get a new Cintiq. As well.
When are we gonna see each other? Actually, you know what? I'll get you the Cintiq too. It's all sitting in the garage collecting dust.
What? You have a Cintiq?
Yeah. It's not the most recent, hottest, greatest model, but it's of maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago. It's still like this one right here behind me. This is my wife's, right?
That's perfect, dude. Oh my God, you're saving my ass.
I have an identical one in the garage.
I wasn't even gonna buy the like highest end one. I just mine. There's a bazillion functions that won't work. This one is about 10, 12 years old now.
Yeah. No, I think it's time for an upgrade. But like again, the very next thing that I say is if it's functional and you don't need all the bells and whistles.
I don't. I mean, I honestly. I color my like the work that I color digitally. That's all I do on the Cintiq. Yeah, and I just use Photoshop. I'm not doing great, and I don't need like touch screen. I don't need any of that.
Yeah, Yeah, and even that, from my understanding, the whole touchscreen pinch zoom kind of thing isn't really, Cintiq Wacom incorporated it because it was on the iPad, but it wasn't necessarily optimized for that. And whatever I heard, it's like, I don't know, it's not really all that elegant, right? So
right.
Again, if you don't need it, it's a functionality that doesn't.
Well,
it's a bell and a whistle that doesn't need to be there.
There's a good. Well, there's a chance. I am gonna come out to visit you and help Jim pack up his house.
Yeah,
that's
looking
Are you really?
like.
Yeah, I mean, he really needs some help. He's out there alone.
Look at that.
What was that?
An obnoxious piece of white something on my black shirt. I don't know.
So I'll be out there. It'll
for
be
the
August.
Fans that are going to come over here and freaking.
But Erica, if do you feel comfortable shipping it? I'll pay for the shipping. Do you think it'll make it?
What are we like? I am not sending you a freaking Cintiq.
Right. Well, yeah.
Well,
so if I came out there, how would I get it home?
Pack it in your suitcase.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
No, actually, it's probably easier enough to ship. It just makes me nervous. I'd rather.
Yeah, that's what
personally,
I'm asking.
Yeah, I'd rather have it so that you know how to handle it. You're bringing it onto the plane.
Well, I'll tell you what, Eric.
Well,
getting a plane ticket to Portland is a hell of a lot cheaper than buying a Cintiq and an iPad.
Yeah, boy.
So
yeah, no doubt. So
okay, all right. Well, fucking awesome.
Yeah. I mean, if you're gonna be in the area anyway, I was gonna say, hey, when's the next time that we see each other? I could potentially bring it to you. We're bringing.
Yeah, it'll probably be at the towards the end of July. I'll come out. There's a space in my schedule, and
we'll swing by. It's a good excuse to kind of hang out while you're in town.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to come see you anyway, but this is great. Yeah. Fucking awesome.
I didn't want you to do that, but now that we have a thing to, now that we're doing this, all right. You know what? That actually leads me into the conversation that kind of popped into my head when we were talking to Jason yesterday.
Okay.
Which is, I don't want to be 100% cynical about this generation that I think is struggling for a level of relevancy. And I think we can.
Before you dive too deep, I do want to say I walked away from that conversation yesterday. Once again, you're like you contextualize things really well, and you show understanding and empathy. There's true wisdom in what you said, and I learned a lot from it, and it opened my mind and my heart a bit to it. So I'm thinking on it differently too. But go ahead.
No, I'll say this: I hate everybody, but in that particular case, I felt like I needed to be able to speak on the. It wasn't even playing devil's advocate. It was just like have we thought broader about this situation. So okay,
right.
So the point that we talked about yesterday, for those who didn't watch, because for whatever reason you didn't watch that episode, please do. By the way, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, go and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out. We're making well, not me. I don't care about this channel, but Sean and Mateo are really making a great effort in order to put a polish on this thing that helps people to tune in more, right? There's a professional polish in it. And shout out to Jamie for I just saw the clip that they put together, that you guys put together for the Eeyore thing, and I thought I was cracking up at the idea.
Dude, that was hilarious.
Yeah, that was really funny.
I mean, I was watching that, and I think this podcast is it's going to go places, Eric.
Yeah. I mean, even if directionally it's going down, but I get it.
It just took me 15 years.
You have to define success for you, and if it means 2 more people next year than what we had this year, that's successful.
That's awesome.
For me, I think it's a waste of time. But anyway, so that on the spirit of that, please subscribe to this channel so Sean doesn't get any more depressed than he already is. You guys get to find out. If you subscribe, ring the notification bell, you get to find out what Eeyore episode that I'm talking about. Okay, so. That shilling out of the way. We talked yesterday about how much easier it is for us, or for an artist that's coming into this space than it was for us back in the day. And that just sounds like a lot of when I was young, back in my day, kind of old man talk. And there's validity to that, but also it's easier and also more difficult now. And the reason why I bring this up. Number one, I think there's just so many things that's vying for your attention. And if we're gonna bracket it really, really specifically, like as a new artist, right? Yeah. There are so many other artists who are in effect competing for the kind of attention, right? That used to be partitioned to just like the higher tier guys, because back in the day, the attention spans being almost very selective, and it was naturally selective actually, because only the cream of the crop had a tendency to get out into the world. That's why a lot of people in our field specifically were almost talking almost exclusively about the same set of people. I like the idea that we're like finding a bunch of new people now. As a matter of fact, Mateo behind the scenes, when he saw the Sia episode, he was like, "Oh, dude, I didn't know of her work, but man, it's great. We should have done a little bit more to help springboard the conversation to make people more aware of what that work is for guys like Mateo." I think that's awesome. We're finding them. Yeah. Back in the day, they're again, the cream of the crop kind of got into the public consciousness a lot faster. But also there's something to be said of why that was happening, right?
Right.
And we'll get back to the idea of why that's not happening as much anymore. And I think it's because, again, technology being limited, and it really had to, like, if you were really good, you were almost undeniable in that space, in that era, right?
Right.
People were going to end up talking about you. And by the way, that's not exclusive to the people who already have a few not professional notches on their belts.
Right.
Right. You'd run into a guy at a convention and you're like, dude, there is this guy.
Yep. And the whole convention would buzz about it. Did you see this kid who's here? Like, I remember Clem Salve.
Yeah, Clem was.
I remember Clem popped up, and it was at, I think it was San Diego even.
San Diego.
And every artist was talking about this kid Clem, and some people had like these little handouts he had given. And I remember seeing that shit. Like, what?
Yeah. Clem and I, back in the day, I wouldn't say like got pretty close, but Clem and I had a relationship, and rest in peace.
And
he passed away.
Favorite artist.
That was very kind of him.
Yeah,
that's very kind of him. But Clem and I were friendly. Anytime that we would have an opportunity to chit chat, that was great. He has since passed. So rest in peace to Clem.
Rest in peace.
What is he? What is that? A decade back now. But if you're not familiar with his work, please go look him up. Amazing artist, but also a good kid with his head screwed on straight.
Yeah,
and
amazing
he has the
artist.
same. Yeah.
That collection that they put out, what was it, last year? It is just beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah. And probably just because of his overall sort of his output, right? It's probably underrepresenting the collective body of his work, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So still worth looking for that book. I can't remember what it's called.
Didn't he do concept art for like the Transformers movie?
I'm not sure about that, but I know for sure that he did a lot of the character designs for the G.I. Joe cartoon that came out that I ended up working on because we reconnected in that space again. And that's right around the time that he was starting to really show signs of his sickness. And
I think it was the last thing he was working on was the Transformers movie.
Okay. Anyway, that said, that was the kind of atmosphere that these conventions sort of, you know what I mean? These conventions sort of like escalated people into. Like it was breeding that kind of, whoa, have you seen that person?
Yeah.
Have you seen this person's work?
Yeah.
And it was harder back then to get that sort of kind of buzz, right? Mm-hmm. And these days, guys like Clem, I'm kind of debating whether or not he would get the same sort of buzz, not because of his quality of work, but because there's so much out there right now.
Yeah,
that would drown Clem out,
Yeah, I agree
people
with
like
you
Clem.
Totally. I feel like there's just so much noise, it's hard to be heard, even if you're loud. Yeah. And when we came up, it was like there was such little noise that you if you wanted to get noticed, you really had to earn that being noticed. And to be noticed meant being noticed by professionals and art directors.
Yes.
Whereas now being noticed is being noticed by fans.
Ooh, let's talk about that.
Thing. Okay.
Let's talk about that really quick. And by the way, we're talking in generalities. So if any of you get offended, first of all, toughen up. Second of all,
exactly.
the reason you're probably offended is because this directly applies to you. So again, go back to point one. Toughen up. Yeah. So I'm saying that jokingly. I know you're trying. You're doing great. You're amazing. Oh my gosh, you're such a brilliant star in a sky full of brilliant stars.
Are you making the Ink Pulp podcast a safe space now?
Well, I'm not. You know. Anyway, so here's the thing. At one point, and I don't know, there were probably mechanisms in place that allowed for, or at least favored, a particular kind of art that helped it sort of cultivate and get to a level of status where you're like, that person is ready for mainstream work, right? Something has happened in which, and I say this as gently as possible, understanding full well there's a lot of sensitive two-ply people out there. Like, I say this as gently as possible. The bar of what constitutes publisher work has somehow lowered.
Yes.
And so now,
yes,
you know, where like, I see a lot of people who are like, wow, that is pretty dang good work, but that probably needs a few more minutes in the oven to bake, right?
Totally.
Suddenly that is the thing that is being published. That is the thing that's being put in front of people's faces and going like, yeah, that represents our IP now.
I see in those artists, and I'm not going to put this on them as much as I'm going to put it on the editorial staff.
Yes.
There's no I don't think growth is the right word. There's no learning the medium of comics once that happens. There doesn't seem to be a growth in the panel to panel storytelling aspect of what they're doing. Maybe their artwork gets better just through the sheer act of doing it. But there's no Mark Chiarellos at these companies anymore that teach you. And also, editorially, I don't know of many who really understand how to edit a comic in
let's
that
talk
sense.
about that. Let's talk about that very briefly. There's a couple things there that we should hit upon. Number one, I agree with you that there's no more Mark Chiarellos who effectively understand. And by the way, we're using Mark as an example, but then we're talking like generally. There's nobody that understands what good looks like for their IP. Right. In order to be the standard bearer, the quality bar that says, in order for you to work on this really well-regarded, full of history set of characters, books, titles, whatever you want to refer to it as, we've established it to look this good. This is what good looks like for us. And once in a while, there's a rare exception that comes in, but they are sort of the exception to the rule. And I'm not even talking about the house style. I'm talking about just the quality bar, right? Whereas I can look at a Kevin Nolan and an Adam Hughes and a Yannick Paquette, and I can look at from the Marvel side, I can look at there's a reason, in my opinion, Pepe Larraz should not be exceptional. If that makes any sense. If you had an understanding of what those books should be about, Pepe should not be the person that is the one that everybody focuses on and goes like, dude, you got to have that guy on all of your books. Right. He should be part of a group, in as much as Olivier Coipel is an exception, in as much as a Chris Bachalo is in as much as an Humberto Ramos is an exception. That should be the standard by which Marvel goes. If you are not anywhere near competitive,
exactly,
right, to these guys, to the body of work and the quality of these people's body of work, I think we should find a way to get you here, right?
Right.
If we believe that you have that capacity, if you believe you have that potential, right? And here's how we're going to do it. So going back to the Mark Chiarello point of reference, right? Which is to say, I think Mark was one of those people to go like, I don't think you're done baking yet, but I think we can get you here. I think there's a way
Dude,
we
that's
see your
an
potential.
exact conversation I had with Mark when I was breaking in.
Yeah.
It was like a couple years of like, you're close. To have someone who can say you're close, that like I don't think that exists anymore, and it sent me home, making me want to work harder because I knew like I could almost touch it. It was like right there in front of me, and then I remember I came back. He's like, okay, you're at a point now where you're ready for like we'll call it an entry level position where we can teach and nurture you and develop you, and that's what happened.
Yeah, and I think it's almost like in baseball or in football or in basketball you have these D-League teams, right? And they had those titles in which they helped cultivate you.
Right. The farm league.
The farm league, basically. Yep. Yeah, and so like they cultivate you to understand where you are at the stage in your craft, not just even in the basic craftsmanship of drawing, which I think is a pretty difficult mountain to climb to begin with, but also everything that's associated with being a comic book artist, which is like the storytelling, the pacing, the shot selection, the understanding how to plus up the script, the understanding of like what makes for good composition, like that's not just the drawing, that's everything,
right.
Knowing when to put in a background and when to omit it, like
right.
not just the composition by way of storytelling, but leaving room for the bubbles, which I was notoriously poor at, like bubbles,
Yeah. I mean, I remember like hearing that as well. And I was like, oh shit, I need to start planning those into my thumbnails.
Right. So my conversation, my thought around that was like, there, in as much as I want to point at these guys who are quote unquote unprepared, at least through my experienced eyes, right? Lacking of expertise, full of expertise eyes, being very subjective, right? I always point at the people who are hiring them. And I want to say, like, what made you hire that person?
Right.
Not because they're poor, or like actually not even just hire them, which is sort of like critical enough, but what made you hire them and put them on this really big book?
Yeah. Yeah. And right? I think I don't think you agree with me on this, but I just feel like there's a big component of, well, you have 100,000 followers on Instagram, so I want to capitalize on that audience by putting you on this book. And at that point, this kind of goes back to where we even started. So if you're popular on social media and you catch the eye of, say, an editor at DC, I'm not like, for example, there's artists we know that came in, were handed a cover gig, which when we were coming up was just unheard of. You had to really prove yourself as an interior artist before, because the cover is sacred ground.
Yep.
But and a cover had a very specific purpose and set of criteria of how they work and what they are, and it was. I remember coming in, I was like, no pinups. We don't want, like, if you can do comics, we know you can do a pinup. And so they put an artist who just does pinups on covers, and no fault of the artist here, but they just blow up because they're these pinups, I guess, that the public really likes. But I just think back in our day, that would have just been rejected immediately.
Oh, for sure.
Wait a minute, we need to talk about what you're doing here. Let's teach you how to do this better. So then that artist goes on to have a lot of success very easily. That didn't happen when we were coming up.
Yeah,
and I think so
those two
in
parts.
that we see the craft take hits.
Yeah, I think that's two parts. Number one, if we get frustrated by that concept, it's because we're looking at, I see the, I watch a lot of basketball history YouTube, and there's always this argument about how this new generation could never exist in the 1980s, in the 1990s,
really?
There's conversations about that, because the what do you call it? The rules are favoring points now. It doesn't favor defense anymore, and the frustration of some of these YouTubers is like, oh man, can you imagine this team being in the 1980s when the Detroit Pistons were just fouling people left and right?
Okay,
these guys would never be able to score, and you're kind of like, well, that's because you're taking a new set of rules and implementing it into an old set of rules. And that's where your frustration comes from. So that's not really realistic.
Right.
It's more like it's more like there's no way to do that apples to apples, right?
Right.
So I think part of our observation, if not frustration, is like understanding, oh, we're applying these rules that ultimately are not in place anymore. That if we were to time travel back and drag these artists to when we were trying to get gigs, I know for sure 80% of them aren't relevant, right? But in this day and age, because people have changed the quote unquote rules on you, that's where it gets sort of like, that's weird, right? But it doesn't make them, like to your point, like the artist isn't at fault. No, right? The artist is just like they are just a tool for a publisher in order to get more eyeballs onto their book. So if that's the current rule now, if that's that's the gate that you have to go through, is just like, oh, we're bringing you along because we know of your popularity and there's a level of craft involved into the stuff that you're doing, then how can you fault them? I point to the tastemakers that say like, what, do you even know why, do you know why you're doing what you're doing? And I would probably, they would probably answer to the positive. Yeah, because they get 100,000 people on Instagram following them. They got 200,000 people, 1 million people following them in all social media collectively.
Which does teach them some business savvy. They learn how to market. They learn the power of marketing.
For sure.
In understanding that, which we didn't have.
But in a way, it degrades, the industry, right?
Yeah,
accidentally. I don't know if it's purposefully.
Yeah, I don't think it's purposefully. But it's. I think it's just mainly based on ignorance from, like you said, those tastemakers.
Yeah, I often look at the editorial staff that brings them on, and I'm talking about the people who do the interior pages now, and I go, this person doesn't have is rough around the edges. If going to the extreme of like, they don't have a clue how to tell stories. They just know how to draw like certain pictures. And even then they're not representing your IP well, based on your guys' history. Now, people have pushed back on that to be like, well, who's to say that it doesn't, who's to say that it's about time that they transform that to include a whole lot more different styles, right? And that's a pretty interesting conversation to have. I'm like, who is to say that? Like, Superman has been drawn like this historically. The X-Men have been drawn like this historically in the past.
But that's a styles one argument. Craft is another. I am what as we're talking, I was going to say we are in a very rich time period in this medium for style. It's more diverse than it's ever been, for better, for worse. But there's a lot of positive to that. I mean, I know you're right. Like, if your brand is Superman, you do need to understand that. Yeah. And stay true to that. But it doesn't mean you can't create opportunities for new styles that are out here now.
No, I agree. And here's the point that I was trying to make with that, right? Like, style being what it is, you still need to understand the thing that you're making. Right. So for me, I often akin it to something like, Marvel is making, it's so ironic that I'm about to make this comparison. Like, Marvel, the MCU, knows the kind of movies, at least I thought that it did. It understood the kind of movies that it needed to make, right? And the moment it started not making those kinds of movies anymore, its audience, or at the very least, its returns, are suffering. Right. Because it stepped away from what it did really, really well. Right?
Yeah, it did.
So similarly, when comics steps away from understanding what it's making and starts putting in these styles, and now I see it as like, it's as if, it would be hilarious to see, Wes Anderson directing a Marvel movie. Right? With him writing, with him shooting. It's just like, oh, I love Wes Anderson. Wes Anderson. Yeah. Me too. But I don't know if that's a good fit when it comes to a Marvel film.
Yeah, it's not. Unless they did something really oddball and different from what they normally do, then yeah.
Exactly. But again, that's already the exception, right? It's like saying, we're going to do the one-off, but it's not going to be our core DNA. It's understanding the kind of sausages we're making, And I think something similar is happening with the printed version of Marvel stuff. Like, it lost track of ultimately the product that they're trying to make, and they're letting oddball things get through, and it's now starting to become the standard. I've, just to prove myself, to be like, am I using the exception to prove the rule? I went through a ton of their most recent catalog, and I'm like, no, I think I'm pretty close. If your ratio is 50-50, even if it's like 60-40 favoring, not favoring the oddball, the fact that you have 40% of artists that are coming in not representing what you historically have been making.
Yeah.
Right. And we can include narrative in here, but I'm going to actively exclude it. Right. Okay. Like, just visually, I go, you've lost the map. You know what I mean? Yep. You're completely off the grid when it comes to understanding what your product is. Totally. And again, it's not the fault of those artists, right? If you are going to make a book that has that particular style, and you're going to now not be the exception, instead be the example, you're going to open yourself up to, and I use this term very carefully, like, Marvel has now lowered the bar as far as like what gets through the gate now to represent their IP. Yeah, that's totally harsh. I think that's a really, really critical, potentially even awful thing to say about the current things that they're publishing. And that's not me going in and going like, oh, back in my day, but it is informed by that. I often want to ask, like, what's informing this now? Now that you've hired these people on, right, and saying you guys are going to represent 40% of the product that we put out there, what's informing that? Is that a conscious effort? Was there a strategy to understand what that is? I come from a space of like, if we make a call like this, and you and I talked about this offline, to be like, let's not just knee jerk into decision making. Let's actually have a strategic, very conscious reason why we're doing the things that we're doing, right? Because the moment you say this is no longer the exception, you start allowing things to permeate that, and now potentially accidentally the bar gets lower and lower. Who gets to play in this really supposedly vaunted playground?
Right. Yeah.
That's an interesting thing to think about. I've seen art that really helps the cat. There's Dan Mora has been doing it, or at least several months ago when I was reading it. There was a World Finest book that Mark Waid is writing. Mm-hmm. And Dan Mora is drawing, and I was like, I don't understand why this can't be the bar.
Right.
Like, why am I so fascinated by Dan, outside of the fact that he's really, really good? Like, why am I so fascinated by, am I putting more credit into this thing more than it's worth because everything out there has been so, the bar out there has been so lowered, right?
Yeah.
Is that an asshole thing to say, Sean?
No, I think you're right. Here's something to think about.
Yeah.
If Kevin Nolan were coming in today, would anyone be able, like any of these tastemakers or editors, whatever you want to call them, see the brilliance in what he does?
Oh, sure. Sure. Omit his name as it's associated with an era. Okay, let's try this. Right. Take a look at Walt Simonson's body of work. Yeah. Just if he were to put together a set of samples that look like the stuff that he was doing on Mighty Thor, right?
Yeah.
Don't think of him in context of back in the day. Don't do that. Take out his name, take out the era in which he came out, blah, blah, blah. Take a look at his body of work right now and how good that Mighty Thor stuff is, right?
Yeah.
And go like, is that still, in this day and age, would that still get work?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
I would hope that the answer is yes. And yet there is no barometer right now to say whether or not that's the high bar.
Right.
I think there's so much accidental. And by the way, mediocre, I'm not weaponizing mediocre. I'm simply just trying to use a word that is just like, that helps describe that sort of middle of the road. Nothing is exceptional.
Right.
People might look at that and be like, actually, that's very, very well weaponized. Okay. All right. Great.
I don't think it's weapon. I mean, you're using it in the way it's meant to be used. Mediocrity. I mean, I think in its nature, people think of it as a denigrating term just because people like to think of things as excellent, and to point something out as mediocre can sound like you're saying it's not excellent, it's bad. But I think mediocrity is the absolute word.
For sure.
If we were going to talk shit, we'd say it's stinks.
Yeah, you would understand.
Terrible.
Yeah, I think you would understand if we were talking shit about somebody and I weaponized that word. If I said like that shit's mediocre, right? Like, but it's different, right? I'm using it as a descriptive. You are not you, but I'm like, there's art out there that are just in that middle of the road space that have plenty of potential, but there is no clear path on how to +1 +10 that. And here's the other one, and it travels in parallel to what I just said. Sometimes there is art out there that is not meant to be, and this is a subjective opinion. There's art out there that is not meant to be on mainstream books. Is that spicy?
No, I think, I mean, first off, yes, you're correct. But I think what the problem is we need more than just superhero comics.
I agree.
I agree. That's where the problem is. It's like these artists would be better suited on other types of material.
Yes, I agree. And that's actually, it's not saying that you're not good, right?
Right.
You're just not meant for superhero comics.
Right. And for me, like, I never thought of myself as a superhero artist, but I learned it because when we were coming in, it was the only viable way to make a living at it. And I enjoyed superhero comics. I just know that it was like Sin City and Hellboy that really were like, okay, I want to do my stuff. Like, I was really into crime and horror and reading EC comics. That was more me. And I learned to be a superhero storyteller.
See, but let me follow up on that, Sean, right?
Okay.
That didn't take anything away from your quality of work, the quality of your work, right?
Right.
Just somebody out there was just saying, this is good, man. This isn't what we do.
Right.
I'm okay with that conversation, right? I'm not trying to go, like, I remember showing my portfolio to people that year that people were talking about the stuff that I was distributing. Have you seen this kid? He's drawing some crazy ass shit. Yeah, but we can't use him.
Yeah, I heard that a lot.
And it was frustrating.
Yeah.
It was frustrating because obviously that's the thing that I wanted to do. But instead of banging my head, which I did, by the way, I was stubborn as hell. And I said, I'm going to make it in the industry, drawing this style that I wanted to draw. Instead of understanding what the industry is all about and saying like, and I think this is the folly of youth. This is the arrogance of youth talking, right? I'll speak for myself, right? Instead of saying like, okay, so craft wise, I know I can do it. What do they need? Right. And this is where it goes back to what we were talking about with Jason Sean, which is, rather than talking about like, okay, I'm not cut out to be this, but it doesn't take away any personal value from my work, especially about the craft that I'm producing. I'd rather have the world change around me rather than saying like, well, where does it apply? Or to say, I think I can be good in that space. Let me see what they're talking about, and change my stuff little by little. Instead it's a cynical conversation about like, these guys don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They need to change with the time and blah, blah, blah. I was like,
and I lived through the same exact thing. I remember there was after the crash when things were starting to come back, and it was around the time the Ultimates first came out, and Hitch was drawing this hyper realistic stuff.
Yeah.
I remember there was a mandate put down by Quesada at Marvel, no more cartoony artists. I mean, Ramos had already established himself, so he was safe. But I remember being told over and over and over by Marvel editors, I like what you're doing, your storytelling's solid, your backgrounds look great, but it's just cartoony and we don't do that.
For sure.
And that frustrated me to all hell, because I could look at their catalog and be like, but what about this and this and this and this? But it just, it frustrated me, but it never broke me, to use that term. It just made me want to get better at what I did, not adapt. Like I was like, yeah, I could go trace some photos and probably get a job, but then I might as well just go get a desk job, because at that point I'm not doing what I enjoy about this.
For sure.
And I just stuck to it and kept banging at it, and shit changed and I got in.
So we're 44 44 minutes in, and here's the thing. I think we've spent that much time talking about like these not necessarily these weird problems, but certainly observations that we had that's a little bit confusing, but also in a way, when I think about it in context of like, why is that happening? And I change the perspective of like, that would never happen in my time to more like what is happening in my time, right? I would like to present potentially solutions. Number one.
Okay.
Marvel, knock it off. Like mainstream people, knock it off. Understand that there is a value in hiring somebody who actually understands the craft of not just your comic, because here's what happens. If you leave it to an editor who has zero background or at the very least left to their own devices, some of those calls are really, really poor because it's often, no, not often. Once, it's, well, often is not a good word, but it's from time to time, it's their choices are predicated upon what helps sell my book right now, but not necessarily tempered by, do I have an understanding of the legacy of the thing that I'm working on?
Right.
Right.
And I think the publishers also irresponsibly give too much feeling of ownership to the creators. And what I mean by that is I've seen like a writer so-and-so, like everyone's flared up because they made this character who is never gay, which make a gay character. I don't care. Yeah, but the author, and I've seen this a few times where the author will get onto Twitter and be like, well, I had an opportunity to represent my my people here. So I did it. And it's like, okay, but that's not what that is.
Yeah.
So
sure.
That's where the publisher fails.
But I mean, yeah, exactly. But going back just strictly from the art side, it's the same kind of muscle, right? Which is to say, I had an opportunity to do X. Nobody was at the front end, at least on I call it like the grown-ups in the room. Like there was no grown-ups in the room telling you that's cool, but we don't do that here. You know?
Right.
Like don't do that. Here is the idea that we have. Although I've heard behind the scenes that there are those editors that say, no, that's fine. That's totally okay. Which makes me go like, oh, you don't even have an understanding of what you do there. You know, like you don't even have an understanding of like, this is like every time people get mad at the creators, like effectively the vendors and the freelancers that are working there, they didn't go into those offices and demand those things to happen to set the internet on fire. Like they can't do that.
It nurtures the brazenness. We're like just seeing like like the publishers by them allowing this to happen, it nurtures like a brazen quality in the creator where it's like I see a tweet like that, I'm like, like Superman's older than you, like who the fuck are you?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but here's the thing, like again, I put that on the shoulders of the publisher. Because when you hire on somebody like that, right? You had to have done your vetting, right? Am I gullible enough? Am I gullible enough to think that maybe you should have looked into that individual and sort of know the firestorm that person could potentially rain down upon you, and be like, we're not getting it anywhere near that, you know, that kind of personality, that kind of individual. Anyway, so going back to the art, right? Number one, knock it off. Understand the thing that you are trying to make. And if you don't understand it, right, who hired you? So I start going up the chain of command to go like, understand the people that you're hiring. Know your legacy, know your personnel. And as soon as you go, and like, what is the metric and by which you say, awesome, you get to continue into this job? Or when do we get to put you on like a performance evaluation, segment where we go like, that is suboptimal. We clearly understand that you are struggling in this space. We will do everything that we can to support you in order to help foster your success here. But at some point, you're not relevant, nor are you competent to hold on to this job. We have a business to run, right? Anyway, that's one. And then number two, from the artist side, and this is the one that really sort of speaks near and dear to me, is as an artist, even though there are things out there that allows you to believe that whatever it is that you're doing is okay enough to print, understand the geography that you're about to get into, understand the industry that you're about to get into, aspire to be better than what's straight in the middle.
Yep.
And what does that mean for you ultimately? What does it mean? Like within the context of your style, what does it mean to you to be exceptional? To each individual, it's something different. And I think there's something happens where, we were talking about this with Jason. We were talking about people who are just like in love with the idea of being relevant, because for whatever reason, they're getting sort of like this weird but synthesized fake engagement. You know what I mean? Rather, make it about your body of work. What does it mean to be exceptional? And we can go down that road. We can go down that path of like what it means. But I think just generally, if you ask yourself that question, what does it mean to be exceptional in the space that I'm in, especially when it comes to my body of work? Go and identify those things. And oftentimes you'll be able to say it often stems from what am I weakest at? Right? Because becoming stronger at what you're currently doing, awesome. But whatever it is that you're weakest at, go identify that and frickin' be just undeniable in that. If it's your storytelling, if it's your lighting, if it's your composition.
Right. And I think that goes back to our days of trying to break in. We had to go to portfolio reviews at conventions, which do they exist anymore? And then if they do, who's doing them? Who's even doing? I mean, like when we came up, you could go to a con, go to the Marvel booth, and there were the editors, and you could hand them a sample stuff. They would look at it and give you feedback. Or DC had the Times or the lottery where you submitted your stuff, and if they chose your name, you got a specific time over that convention weekend, and you sat down with Mark Chiarello. But in those times, you sat down and your weaknesses were pointed out to you very quickly. And it gave you something to go home and build upon to do exactly what you just said. Make that weakness now a strength. And get to the point where your weakest areas are strong enough that you are working.
Yeah. Can I bring up something that just popped into my head right now? Right?
Yeah.
Going back to our previous, the thing that we talked about as far as the farm system is concerned, right? Yeah. Back in the day, I hate that statement, but back in the day, actually in most recent times, when I've seen artists become a big thing at one book, whether it be like a smaller publisher / independent publishing thing, and next thing you know, they're on a Marvel book, right? And you go like, oh, that's not a good fit. Just based on understanding that character, the legacy of that book, the legacy of that title, that's not a good fit. And I'd realize, oh, there's a disconnect there. Because suddenly minor self-published, independent published book, or, from these smaller publishers, that doesn't translate well into your IP. Right. That's why sometimes I go like, that worked really, really, really well for X and Y, but it does not work for A and B because you're using the wrong farming system. Right. Marvel used to do it internally. They would put you on smaller books, again, knowing full well the guardrails are we make superhero books here. Yeah, right? Yeah. And not just these kinds of stories, but these kinds of visuals. Right. So let's use a person that I was thinking about just a couple of weeks back, Rick Leonardi. Right. Okay. Yeah. Stylistically, Rick Leonardi was like, that's different, isn't it? Because that's not Sal Buscema. No. That's not like of the era of like he was the next generation up from like a John Byrne, like that era that came in. Right. But there was something there. Yeah. And they started cultivating it to be a little bit closer to what they need. Yeah. So that he drew Spider-Man 2099, right? Which is like super relevant now because of the Spider-Verse movies, right?
He designed Spider-Man 2099, yeah.
There you go. So suddenly you have this guy who wasn't necessarily a perfect fit. Right. But they put him on things like X-Men and like they slowly brought him up until and then they started testing the waters with his body of work. Oh, it doesn't necessarily work with... Go ahead.
Early on, they put him with master comic artists as his inkers. And there was a training in that. I mean, Marvel used to have a book called Marvel Showcase. And that was, I'm pretty sure it was Joe Kubert was kind of in charge of that in its inception. And it was a place where when someone showed promise.
I think it was Marvel Fanfare, right? Not Marvel Showcase.
Marvel Fanfare, yeah. And so then they were like, okay, look, we're going to give you 8 pages.
Yes.
And you're going to do this under the guidance of Joe Kubert and whatever inker we're going to give you. Mm-hmm. And it was a training ground. And if you got a few shots, and if you performed well, they'd bump you up to like a fill-in issue. Mm-hmm. But also in Marvel Fanfare was an area for established artists to take some creative risks. Mm-hmm. So that's where you saw Mazzucchelli, coming off of his super realistic Born Again and Batman Year One, come back to Marvel Fanfare and do that Angel story, which showed where he was going to be going. It was a very independent style in a Marvel book, but they didn't give him like an X-Men miniseries like that.
Sure. And I think, taking that out of context of its time, I think there's room for that. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because I look at some of the titles that they publish. I mean, I'm picking on Marvel, but just generally, right? Mm-hmm. I look at some of the titles that's being published, and you're like, you're taking a risk on this book that moves 10,000 units if you're lucky. Right. Why not partition part of that? Whatever it is that you're going to ultimately you had to understand or understood before you even wrote the check to greenlight that series that thing was only going to move X amount of units, right?
Right.
Why not then use that as to your point, like a test area,
right?
To sort of to have these guys who have the potential to put together a small little, to get them into the system of understanding what they should be trying to go for,
Right.
Anyway, that's advice from all. But the other, I want to go back to the artist because I'm trying to think of the current geography that they're in and how difficult it is for them to stand out from everybody else out there that's vying for their attention, from Instagram to Twitter.
There's a lot of noise. Yeah.
Here's another one. And I want you guys to take this to heart, right? The kind of attention that Twitter breeds, and I say this in the most pointed, critical way possible, which is like talking stupid smack and being an idiot, right? Twitter loves you. They just freaking highlight the hell out of you if you do that, because and I speak from experience because at one point you couldn't tell me that my stuff wasn't relevant. I drew awful anatomy. I drew in a style that was not relevant at the time, but because of quote unquote how good I was, I didn't want to listen. Right. So take it from an experienced, learned place. Right.
Right.
Let professionalism and conduct be part of your guiding principle.
That's good.
Right. Just pay attention to potentially how that is going to be looked at, because I believe this to my core. We are coming up on a version of the comic book business in which that sort of, you're using an artist as an example where Flair was great, and that's kind of the thing that got them through the door, and it allowed them to thrive in an arena that wasn't really fostering leveling you up. It's just taking advantage of who you are, right? We're slowly coming up into a geography in which merit is starting to become the thing that people are paying attention to.
I think so.
Build that muscle for yourself now, right?
Yeah.
Build yourself into this space in which nobody can point at anything in your timeline when they start vetting you as a potential employee, where they go, look how problematic this guy is. Look how problematic this artist is. We don't want any part of that because we value our IP more than the hype that this person can get can bring to the title, right? That future is coming. You want to be ahead of all of these guys who are effectively, phasing themselves out because they're so stuck on that hype and all of that that online stupidity and grandiosity. I would rather, if I were in a hiring position, look at a person and go, what does this person bring to our IP that I know represents us well holistically? Not just like, oh, that's a pretty pinup, that's a great rendering, that's whatever it is, Oh, and by the way, they got 50,000 followers, right? Because
Right.
if I'm doing my job right on the leadership position, and that's not necessarily me, guys like me are going to get into these positions, because the dummies that are like misrepresenting the IP in the leadership and editorial places, those guys are getting phased out, man. I'm seeing it. Right?
Good.
It's slow. It's
Good.
incremental, right? But it's happening, and that's good. For the long-term health of an industry,
Absolutely.
you need to have people who are taking their position seriously and not doing it on the basis of like high five and secret handshakes. Once those people are embedded into those companies, and it's slowly, incrementally, maybe sort of like infuriatingly starts to climb back up, and it's going to. Might not be 5 years from now, potentially 10 years from now, but it's going to happen.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Once it starts, you want, as an artist now in your early 20s, you want to be ready by your mid 20s, right? Especially when it comes to conduct. That's not even talking about your general leveling up of craft. Your conduct is going to be just just one more component that makes you that much more employable. And then, in the broad sense, by proxy, your relevancy.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely does. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We didn't do any jokes in the middle of that. We were just talking all sorts of.
We were a little jokey on the front, but that was a good conversation, and you know, it was pretty serious, but needed to be.
Yeah, I suspect that people are going to come in and be like, "Well, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that."
And that's okay.
I encourage you to disagree with any and all of this.
Exactly.
And if, by the way, not just simply, I would encourage you to not just agree, but obviously put your comments down inside the comments area.
Definitely.
Do it respectfully. Do it in the context, in the spirit of having a conversation and a back and forth. Not just to immediately shut it down and say, "Hey, you guys are old," although we are. Like, you guys are a bunch of old farts trying to exist in new world.
What you just said, like, made me think for a second of something that happened this week, and this is a short story.
Yeah.
But I posted something, like I was packing up art for my Whatnot show, and I like made a reel of like the pieces I did and the packaging I was doing, and posted. I just wanted to see how that would perform. I hadn't done a post like that, and I got a comment. It was like, "The work looks great, but you did an awful job packing. Is any of that recyclable?" And just went on a rant about me, and I'm like, well, maybe it is me, maybe it isn't. I'm running a small, like, what? Like, it wasn't a conversation, it wasn't a question, it was just a reprimand.
Sure.
And that's the internet.
So
I would like to encourage you guys to use this space as a conversational space. We're not here telling you this is the final word. This is our opinion.
This is our perspective. Yeah. And by the way, that person that's coming in, talking to you about how none of that is, recyclable, sustainable, blah, 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 blah. That's cool. And you're probably right. But here's something that Mateo says, and I fully buy into it. Don't make your shit our shit.
Right, exactly.
Right?
And you don't know me. I do try to recycle as much as we can in my house.
But now you're defending it. Here's the thing.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
If that person has any sort of like, if they are by their way,
they're on a phone. they're on an iPhone. So
I don't want to play that. Well, what about you game? What I'm saying is that if you are conducting your life the way you are sort of like projecting it outward, you win. You're doing great. If you are recycling, if you are packing your artwork in sustainable materials and blah, 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 amazing. Congratulations. You're actually living by the standards and what you set, not just for yourself, but obviously for others. You win. But forgive me if I don't put any stock into what you're saying.
Right. And my response was simply thank you. That was it.
Good. Because given like, I don't know, it comes off to me, but here's the thing, like to your point, it's the internet. Right, like everybody is free. What's amazing about the internet is that they're free to give their opinion on something, even unsolicited, and it's up to us to react accordingly, or at the very least, in the capacity in which we go, like, okay, thank you very much. We'll move on this way. Congratulations to that person. You win.
Right.
Anyway,
you got me.
yeah. You win. All right, 1:03 in. It's pretty freaking awesome.
That was great.
Let's do it again without Mateo, because I think it works really, really well.
Yeah, maybe we don't need double up Scalera. Maybe he's double down Scalera.
I think that also sounds pretty good, though. Double down.
Yeah.
All right. Talk to you.
All right, cool. This is The Ink Pulp Podcast. This is the Ink Pulp Podcast. Comics, hip hop, life.